Welcome to Real Money, Real Life, the podcast where we get real about money and the messy human stuff that comes with it. I'm Linda Grizely, financial wellness speaker, personal finance educator, and creator of the Me Money Method. This is the show for people who feel behind financially and want to finally understand money and make confident decisions that work in their real life. Because money isn't just math, it's life. And you deserve to feel confident with money and good about how you spend it. If you've ever looked at conversations about financial freedom or early retirement and thought that might work for other people, but there's no way I'm ever getting there, this episode is for you. Today, we're going to talk about FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early, Coast FIRE, and why financial freedom may be a lot more realistic and a lot more flexible than people think. So a lot of people hear terms like FIRE or financial independence and immediately assume it applies to wealthy entrepreneurs, high earners, or people who started investing in their 20s. But underneath that conversation is something much more human. People just wanting more breathing room, more flexibility, and less fear about the future. So today we're unpacking what financial freedom means in real life and why feeling financially trapped is often more about life than just math. One thing that I see all the time is people assuming they've either made it financially or somehow they've failed financially. But real life usually is a lot messier than that. And I think sometimes what people are actually searching for isn't early retirement, but the feeling that they have options. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Schneider, entrepreneur, personal finance educator, and founder of Personal Finance Club. After selling his company in his 30s and reaching financial independence himself, Jeremy began teaching millions of people online about investing, wealth building, and financial freedom through simple, accessible financial education. He's also one of the founders of Nectarine, a platform connecting people with advice-only financial planners. And I want to mention before we begin that I am a financial planner on the Nectarine platform. Nobody is being compensated for any endorsements here, and any experiences we discuss may not be representative of all Nectarine experiences. And please also listen to the full disclosures at the end of the episode. Jeremy, welcome to Real Money, Real Life.
Hey, Linda. Thanks for having me, and great work on those disclosures.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like I was going to be all the way through the episode before I even started introducing you there. I'm so happy to have you here and talk about Personal Finance Club and financial independence, because I know you are one of the ones I talked about, younger and was able to retire early. And yet here you are doing all these other things. So I want to hear about your story first, and then we're going to talk about how financial independence can apply to everyone, not just someone like you who was lucky enough to be some wizard and retire early.
Thank you for calling me a wizard. I hope I'm a good wizard. Very briefly, I graduated from college with a computer science degree. I turned down a full-time job offer from Microsoft and instead decided to start a company. I had no idea what I was doing. Sometimes people hear that like, oh, this guy must be connected and has venture capital. And I literally had no idea what I was doing. I Googled like how to start a company. I had no connections. I had no friends. I had no money. I had no anything. I was just like a kid didn't even have a garage. You hear about businesses in garages. I didn't even have a garage. I was like in my bedroom because I had roommates and stuff and no garage. Started an internet company, was just like, selling websites, doing whatever I could do, kind of turned into a product. Fast forward 12 years and I was doing pretty well. We had 7 employees. We were doing about $1 million a year in sales. And I sold it for $5 million when I was 34. And then when I was 36, I realized that my investments were growing faster than my paycheck. I was now working for the company that bought us, getting a W-2 paycheck. And I was like, oh, I don't think I even need to work anymore. And I think at that time in my life, I hadn't even heard of FIRE or financial independence. I mean, I guess I knew the phrase financial independence, but I didn't really have a lot of definitions around it. And so then at the age of 36, I quit my job and have never really had a real job ever since. I'm still doing stuff, which I think the retirement police can get mad about. And they say, okay, you're not retired, you're doing stuff. I'm like, okay, that's technically true. And if that doesn't count for you, that's fine. But I do whatever I want, which in this case is working, building stuff, spending time with my family, traveling. That's kind of what life is about.
Yeah. And I love how in the introduction it says that you began teaching millions of people online because, you just started teaching millions of people like they were already there. You didn't do anything to
I
get them
mean,
to show up. So tell us about how you grew your followers, because Personal Finance Club, you started it and you just wanted to share information. How did it grow?
yeah, similarly to starting the business, I had nothing. I think I had an Instagram account just for my personal thing with like 200 friends following me. I had posted like 15 times to Instagram. I had no idea. And then about a year after I quit my job, when I was kind of in my early retirement, and for the first year, I did what I think everyone thinks they're supposed to do if they retire early. I traveled, I worked out, I played video games. I just did whatever. Every day was a Saturday, which is fun for sure. But also, I was surprised how I was really like lacking purpose. I really like building things. I was lacking goals. I was lacking tension. It was just kind of like I was just like a blob. I was like a blob. I didn't really like being a blob. I like going for something, And so I was like, okay, I don't really need to do anything for the money necessarily, but I'm going to start a passion project. I'm going to become an influencer, which is a ridiculous thing for a guy in his mid to late 30s to do. But I just said, I'm going to post Instagram every single day for a year, and with a goal of hitting 50,000 followers. And I had no followers, no plan. And if you scroll back and look at like the first couple months of posting, I was, to my credit, I was posting every single day, but it was like really crappy, low effort. Like no one was liking, no one was commenting, no one was sharing. But then I got better over time. And then, 2 or 3 or 4 months in, like I remember someone with 5,000 followers shared my post, and I was like, oh, 5,000, like who is this famous person? And then like one of my posts kind of went viral for back then, where like someone with like 10,000 followers shared it, and then someone with 50,000 followers shared it. And I was like, 50,000 followers. Like I just had this like dream, like this image that they must be like wealthy and famous, and the what you could do with 50,000 followers, I could only imagine. But sure enough, persistence through the rest of the year, and it took me about, I think, like 54 weeks, and then I hit 50,000 followers myself. Just it kept growing through persistence and better content. But I mean, it really was nothing at the beginning. And I think people always look at these big Instagram accounts and think, oh, they've always had it or whatever. But I mean, I think everyone starts from zero, and everyone's bad at the beginning. And now, fast forward 6 years later, I think I have 1 million followers across platforms. Like Instagram's at like 680,000 or something, and between TikTok and YouTube and the others, I think I've got enough to hit him. Technically, I have 1 million followers.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about financial independence. So a couple of things. I'd like for you to explain what financial independence is, and then also talk about how a big part of it was about really living below your means.
Okay. So yeah, that acronym FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early, I think it's just kind of like trying to put a name on this concept that is contrary to what I think people think of with retirement. I think, the pop culture understanding of money is you get a job, you spend all your money every year of your life, and then when you're 65, something happens. I don't know what, but something happens, and then you get to retire. But here's the problem with that pop culture understanding of retirement, which is nothing happens at 65. If you have no money and you've spent all your money your whole life, and then you want to retire at 65 and you quit your job, you need money to pay for food. And, there is Social Security, which is more of a safety net. But if you ever look up how much money you're going to make from Social Security, it's very, very little. It's something very small. Where living in San Diego, where I live, you couldn't even afford rent, much less rent and food, much less rent, food, transportation, everything else you like to do. And so since nothing magic happens at 65, the question is like, why 65 at all? Why not 60? Why not 70? Why not anything? And so financial independence is just this idea that says, hey, you can quit your job and be financially independent and not need to work to financially afford to live indefinitely. Not when you hit a certain age, but when you hit a certain amount of money. And that money, there's some rules of thumb, but a popular one is basically based on the 4% rule that says, hey, however much money you have saved up and invested, if you can live off of 4% of that, then the invested amount is big enough that will grow and, ride the ups and downs of the stock market and inflation and support you indefinitely. It's not perfect, and it's not always exactly 4%, and there's different people and different ages and things like that that have different takes. But what that's saying is that, let's say you need $100,000 to live, then if you can get 2.5 million, 4% of 2.5 million is 100,000. That means you can be making six figures a year just from living off your 2.5 million portfolio. If you can live on 40,000, then you can live off of $1 million portfolio. And so you mentioned frugality. It turns out like a big factor in, are you financially independent, isn't, it's partially how much money you have, but it's really how much money you spend. And if you spend less, you not only can you get there faster because you're saving more, but you'll actually need less to even get there. And so the savings rate that you have, just based on how much you spend and how much you make, that savings rate is huge relative to how fast you can get to financial independence. And so my own personal journey, like when I was growing my company, it sounds, like, oh, I started an internet company, I'm a computer science guy. Like my max take-home salary was $36,000 a year living in San Diego. This was 10 years ago now, like 2015 is when I sold the companies, to be fair. But still, $36,000 a year wasn't that much 10 years ago either. I drove a 99 Ford Explorer, like bought used for $3,000 cash. I lived with roommates. I was paying like $700 a month in rent. So, frugality is a big part. Even when I had that windfall, I didn't spend it all. Of that $5 million that I got from selling the company, after my share in taxes was about $2 million. And so, you can definitely blow through $2 million pretty quickly in Southern California, but I didn't. But now it's grown. It's like over $6 million because I'm living below my means and being frugal along the way.
Thanks for sharing that, Jeremy. Living below your means basically means that you're spending less than you're bringing in. That way you're actually saving additional money. So if you have that much money when you're younger, you have the power of compounding and interest growing on interest and things like that. Is there a timeline where the 4% rule makes sense? Like, is it always 4%? If you retire at 30, do you use the 4% rule, or is that a rule that's based on retiring at, say, 65?
So I really like the 4% rule because it's simple, but the analytical nerds will come at me and they'll say, wow, the 4% rule is based on the Trinity study. And the Trinity study looked at like a 15 and 30 year time frame. And it's only good for 30 years. And so if you're retiring at 30 and then when you're 60, you might have problems. The reality though is that no one lives their life in a vacuum like that. No one retires at 30 and then plugs their ears and closes their eyes and hums and says, I'm not going to look at any sort of outside factors for the next 30 years. And then when I'm 60, if I go broke at 61, I'm going to be like, oh, I got the 4% rule wrong 31 years ago. I did it wrong. The reality is if you're living on 4% of your invested assets, like you're doing incredible. And you'll probably last forever with like a high 90% certainty. And if things start to go bad somewhere in the following decades, then you can maybe adjust. Maybe I won't buy that new car. Maybe I will pick up like a little side hustle or a little like consulting gig or whatever. I'm like much less concerned about this exact number and it's like scientific likelihood to last, decades in the future. The much more common reality on the ground is the type of people who reach financial independence generally don't just sit there and do nothing for the rest of their lives. In fact, they find that once they are unshackled by the burden of their day-to-day W-2 job, like their mind is free and their body is free and their time is free and they can go do stuff that they want. And maybe that's starting a company, or maybe that's selling stuff on Craigslist, or maybe it's working at a coffee shop, or maybe it's consulting back at the company you used to work for 4 times the money and a quarter of the hours. That's the kind of thing that happens in reality, which is like once you're around that number and you get the confidence to quit and say goodbye to the W-2 job, you're not just sitting on your hands counting down the decades to see if this thing worked when you're in your 70s or 80s or 90s. You're like living your life. And often, almost always, that includes having some other kind of income along the way.
Yeah. And you still need to check in with your planning. We always say once a year, at least at a minimum, because so many things change. Okay, so we've mostly been talking about, I call it true FIRE, which is financial independence, retire early, where you save up an amount and say, okay, I can retire. That doesn't mean you're going to, but you have the number, you're following the 4% rule or whatever rule you're following. But let's talk about different kinds of FIRE, because I think that mainly for my audience who feels like they're behind, I think the idea of what we call Coast FI or Coast Financial Independence might be something that they might be more relatable to. So tell us what that is and how that works.
Yeah. So True Fire is just described as this like concept of that once you have 25 times your annual spending, which is the 4% rule, then you can live on it forever. But there are some other kind of like flavors of fire. One of them is Coast Fire, which says, okay, maybe I'm not at 25 today, but where I'm at today, if I never invest another dollar, the growth of where I am will get me to that 25x number by traditional retirement age. And that means you can basically coast to financial independence by traditional retirement age, which says, okay, maybe you're 45 and you've got some kids or you want to do some traveling or whatever. You're like, okay, hey, wait a minute. I have 300K between my 401k and my Roth IRA, and that's going to double 3 times by the time I'm 65. 300,000 becomes 600,000, 1.2 million, 2.4 million. Like my 300,000 might actually get to, $2 million by traditional retirement age. Now I can change my lifestyle. Now, all that money that I was aggressively spending from 35 to 45, I can dial it back a bit and spend a little bit, like live my 40s more. I can travel more. I can quit the job I hate that was paying $180,000 a year and take a job I love that's paying $90,000 a year. And I think that's an important consideration because, I always say there's no award for the richest guy in the cemetery or the richest person in the cemeteries. The goal isn't to maximize your net worth the day you die. In fact, if you've done that, I think you've lost because you haven't maximized the important part, the value of your life. And money is just a tool to live the best life. And so if you can do something like Coast FI, where you're saying, okay, hey, I'm going to actually dial down my retirement savings a bit and dial up my 40s and 50s spending a little bit, because there's this great book that Die with Zero that talks about there's this compound growth curve that is this exponential growth of your investments, but there's this other curve that is impacting our lives, which is this exponential decay of our health. And what you might want to do in your 40s or can do in your 40s, maybe you won't want to do or can do in your 50s, and the same for 50s and 60s. And my wife has a grandpa who's 87 and he doesn't want to do much of anything. He doesn't like sitting for long periods of time, like on a car or plane. He's like going very far. Was considering buying a car, but he just bought the same car he had because he liked it. And so so for him to have this exponential growth taking impact in his late 80s maybe isn't very good because he didn't get to use it back in his 60s when he could have been having more fun or whatever. So I think when you're thinking about financial independence, don't just think that, hey, when I get to this finish line 25x, I'm going to shoot off the fireworks and put my arms over my head and declare victory, because you're going to get there and realize, oh, like there's nothing here. There's no ticker tape parade. But yeah, Coast FI is good. And there's also like Barista FI, which is, hey, okay, maybe I still need to work, but I can work at a job I love. Like Starbucks has like part-time work can actually give you health insurance. So some people say, okay, I'm not going to work, on Wall Street 80 hours a week, making 150 grand a year. I'm going to go work at Starbucks part-time, making 30 grand a year, but they're going to cover my health insurance. And that plus everything I've saved along the way will still get me to the FI number I need to live a happy life.
All right. So we've got regular FIRE, we've got Coast FI and Barista FI. What are the others? I know you had some other ones. Some of them.
There's a ton. There's Lean FI, which is saying, okay, hey, I hate my job so much. I just need to be like ramen noodles and tent camping poor, so if I can get to 600,000, 4% of 600,000 is 24,000 a year. I'll take it. I'm going to live on 24,000 a year, 2,000 a month. And that's Lean FIRE. There's Fat FIRE, by the way. I'm just going off the top of my head here, so I might have to
that's okay.
Look up some of these. But Fat FIRE is the opposite. Fat FIRE is like, okay, I like fire, but I don't want to do the ramen thing. I want to do like the first class flights thing. And so I want $5 million is always the number in my head. Like 5 million, 4% of that is what's $200,000 a year, right? So $200,000 a year, not having to work for it, that's pretty. Depending on your perspective, maybe that's a lot, maybe it's a little, but to me, that's a lot. But if you want 400,000 a year, then you need 10 million, and that would be Fat FIRE. There's Dumpster FIRE, which means your finances are great, but your life is a mess. There's Wi-Fi, which means you just marry rich and you marry a rich woman and she's financially independent. Um, I don't know. There's some other joke ones, but I think those are
Okay,
the
yeah.
main ones people talk about.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's people listening who are in their 50s and they feel like they've missed their chance, what would your advice be for them?
I always get this one time someone sent me a DM on Instagram and said, Jeremy, is it too late for me to start? I feel so behind. And I asked how old they were, and they were 23. And I wanted to reach through my phone and grab them by the lapels of their shirt and shake them back and forth and yell in their stupid little baby face, "You're not too late, you're a baby." But I didn't do that because you're not supposed to shake babies. That's dangerous for babies who are 23 years old. But of course, you're not too late for 23. But the reality is that was a silly example. But like, yeah, people in their 40s and 50s always feel like, oh, it's too late for me. But too late for what? If you're 50, you probably have 30, 40 years of life ahead of you. You're going to just like write those years off? Like, not at all. And in fact, I think, again, the ground truth when you're 50 and you feel late, what's probably true is you've been making a lot of progress that you don't realize. You probably are earning more. You probably have paid down some debt. You probably have a much better launching pad than you did when you were 25. And so if you're 25 and you're like, oh, okay, I've got $60,000 of student loans. I make $30,000 a year. I've like got a credit card debt. I have no opportunity to save $1,000 a month. I don't even make $1,000 a month. But when you're 50, you're like, okay, I don't feel like I'm a multimillionaire yet, but my launching pad is much better. And when you understand the math behind financial independence, maybe it doesn't take you 40 years to get there. Maybe you can do it in 10 years. Maybe you can do it in 8 years. Maybe you can do it in 12 years. And so I think that there is no too late. And I think that making changes today at the age of 50, you will feel the impact today. You're like, wow, I like have a plan. I feel better. I'm like putting some money away. I've like thought about taxes. I thought about investments, and and I thought about spending on the things that I love. And so you say, hey, now that I have a plan, I feel better about spending. I feel better about saving. And so it's not just about, this 87-year-old better, financial outcome down the road. It's about like living your 50s better too. And I think you can feel better and live better if you start now. And it's definitely not too late.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the other thing I would say is because I think around your 50s, you start to realize that like 60, 65 isn't that far away. And that's like typical retirement, Social Security full retirement age for people that age is 67. So I think like the idea of that future self, which is always a stranger to you, becomes a lot closer to you. Right. And so I think that's why they start to feel behind and they feel like they're never going to be able to stop working. And I think one of the things is you did mention it that they have a bigger launching pad than they think, but also that living within your means and really rethinking their lifestyle, because by this point kids are getting older, but they've adapted to a certain lifestyle and there might be some changes that they can make as they transfer on to the next phase of saving for retirement. They can look at things differently once they have other obligations out of the way.
Totally. And, I think a lot of people just kind of coast, they're like, oh, whatever we've been doing. Just today, like 30 minutes ago, my wife found out this subscription she had that she was paying like $250 a month for. She could actually lower it to only pay $100 a month for. It was like a business thing. It wasn't like a personal thing, but sure enough, I was like, dude, that's $150 a month right there. There's, if we take our head out of the sand and look at what's important to us, what we're spending money on, where we can cut and save. I don't think it means you have to like live a worse life. I think it just means being more purposeful about your plan. And I honestly think that translates very quickly to like feeling better. You're like, oh man, that 150 instead of going to some soulless tech company is going to my Roth IRA. And that when I put that number into the retirement calculator, now at 65, we're not having to downsize and eat cat food and decide between medicine and dinner. We can live a good life then too. And so I think that it's scary to look at money a lot of times, but when you do, you start to feel better pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's talk about some mindsets and internal obstacles, like stories people tell themselves. Do you see like typical emotional themes that come up when people talk about financial freedom?
Definitely. I mean, the one I always go back to is investing, because I think people think investing is impossibly hard. A lot of short videos I've been getting on are The Big Short, talking about these shorting these bond derivatives made up of mortgages, and these very financially savvy guys making these huge bets. And there's Wolf of Wall Street. There's always this image of guys in the New York Stock Exchange holding white pieces of paper over their head, yelling buy and sell. And so when the word investing is said to a normal person, they're like, okay, how I don't have a decade of my life and 40 hours a week to dedicate to learning this. How could I learn this? And there's actually some really good news, which is the world of investing, it can potentially be infinitely complex, but optimal investing is actually dead simple. And the strategy is just don't even worry about all that crazy nonsense I was just talking about. Just worry about buying more shares in something called an index fund, which basically buys your fair share of all the companies of the world. And so as all those companies are growing and innovating and profiting and becoming more efficient, you get your cut. And then all you have to worry about is just getting more shares, and that's it. And that is actually really, really close to optimal investing, short of a few tax nuances and things like that. But when you cut out all this scary stuff, optimal financial living is pretty simple. Personal Finance Club has 2 rules. Rule number 1 is live below your means. And rule number 2 is invest early and often in something like an index fund. And if you just do that, whatever you spend less, and you put everything in an index fund. You go at it for a few months, you're like, oh man, this is starting to really pick up some traction. And then that's how you get to that compound growth and build a lot of wealth over time.
So what you're talking about, I call passive investing, where you just pick a simple strategy and just let it go with a little bit of rebalancing here and there, as opposed to active investing, where you're buying and selling and trying to time the market. And I think that a lot of what goes into being okay with one method or the other is behavioral and the idea behind it. So when you have someone who feels like finance is just really complicated, there's lots of simple ways that they can invest, just like what you were just talking about. But there's also people that when markets are fluctuating up and down, or things are happening in politics or around the world, they feel like they should be doing something. And so that behavioral part comes out, where they're like, I can't just let it sit. Things are happening. I need to do something. Do you have any suggestions for people who are trying to be passive in an index fund, but feel like they should be doing something?
That's so true. And that is the hardest part, because to go onto an investment website and, pick an index fund and click the buttons and set up an auto investment, that takes 5 minutes. Obviously, if you've never done it before and you don't know what buttons to click, it's going to take you a little longer to figure out which website to go to and which buttons to click. But there are advisors who can help with things like that, like at hellonectarine.com, plug. And that's where Linda can be found too, by the way. If you want to hire Linda herself, she's right there and has a price posted and everything. But the hard part is really, like I said, the mindset, the mentality of trusting the process. And there's this famous lore of a Fidelity study. I'm not actually sure if it's true or not, to be honest, but I believe the essence of it. And Fidelity supposedly did a study of the demographics of the best investors. Is it older people, younger people, men, women? Is it immigrants, natively born Americans, high education, low education, whatever it is? They found that the best investors were a tie between 2 types of people: dead people and people who forgot they had an account. Because those people were the best at not messing with the plan of setting it up, right? And because, we as humans, in almost every other aspect of life, doing more is the right move. If you want to have better health, you should put more work into a diet plan and watch what you're eating better, work out more, work out harder, work out more consistently. If you look at people who are just shredded, they put a lot of effort into it, right? And I think there's almost an evolutionary aspect here, which is, if we're in a prehistoric time and we hear a twig snap in the jungle, we would be well served to, be prepared to fight or flight, right? But investing is not like that. And it's very weird that it's not like that, because if you hear that a recession's coming, you think, oh, I should go pull my money out of the market, but you shouldn't. In fact, doing anything is kind of contrary to your own best interest. And every single week, I know that we're recording this a little bit in advance, and so it's hard to, I don't know what's going to be the day it comes out, but the thing it is today, everyone thinks the SpaceX IPO is going to be like existentially bad for their investment for some reason. And they want, I'm hearing, the buzz I'm hearing is people want to have like a fund that shorts SpaceX. So it's a fund my SpaceX, or it doesn't have SpaceX or whatever. But then a few months before that, it was the Iran conflict. And a few months before that, it was the tariffs. And before that, it was oil. And before that, it was inflation. Before, there's COVID, there's always something that people are like, I got to do something about this. But if you just ignore all that and just hold through everything and just say, I'm not going to do anything for anything, that's where you get this amazing compound growth. And the more you mess with it, the more you monkey with it, the worse it gets. Another analogy I like is that your portfolio is like a bar of soap. The more you touch it, the smaller it gets. And so it's very counterintuitive. It's very counter to our evolutionary instinct, but it is mathematically optimal for you to make the most money.
That's a great analogy, the bar of soap. I hadn't heard that one before. And I had not heard about the Fidelity study. So that's
all right.
I'm going to have to look that up.
Some new content. I've looked it up. I find a lot of people referencing it, but I can't find it. And so I don't know if it's like urban legend or if it's actually true, but I like the story either way.
In my investing class, I show people a history of the stock market in a graph, like a line graph that goes up and down. Mm-hmm. And I show them like the last year and that, how it's gone up and down and what you feel every day. And then I take it out 5 years, 10 years, and I show them the dips. Like you can see the dip in 2020, right? Everybody knows what happened in 2020. The pandemic just fell. So I show them that, and then I take it farther out. And you see like that huge dip that everybody felt like horribly during that time is this tiny little blip on this on this chart that just keeps going up and up and up when you look at it from history. And I know that past performance is not indicative of future results. Got to get that little disclaimer in there. But when you look at it that way, you realize like the stuff that you're feeling in that moment is huge in that moment, but a blip in the overall picture.
And the thing that I always shocks me about that is that when you zoom out, you get this kind of like much more smooth-ish looking exponential curve where it's really going up sharply at the end. And so a lot of people look at that like, well, it hasn't gone up too much lately. Aren't we too high now? But if you take that like 40-year window and you like move it kind of anywhere along the time frame of like modern economic history, it still looks like that. And so back in like the 50s, there's exponential. Back in the 60s, there's like bad decades. There's like the stagflation in the 70s. There's the lost decade in the early 2000s. There's a few little time periods where like, okay, that might not be exactly true, but pretty much always it feels like, oh, we're really high now. We're really high now. But I like to look at it on a logarithmic scale where instead of linear, it looks like this big curve where this hockey stick curve where it's like getting too high. But if you look at it on a logarithmic scale where it's saying, okay, every 10% gain along the way is the same vertical distance on the chart, it looks like a line. It just looks like almost like an exact straight line. And you're like, the Great Depression was pretty gnarly, even on a logarithmic scale, because we lost like 90% back then. But outside the Great Depression, it's just kind of like a little bumpy line. And there's like all these little, like these things we're freaking out about. It's like, if you ran your finger on lines, it'd feel like a texture, not like a catastrophic cliff. So that's a great way to think about it. And I think that the longer you're doing it, the more you appreciate that these are just factors of life. But I definitely hear from new investors. They're like, Jeremy, I've been investing $1,000 a month for 3 months, and I only have $3,030. I'm like, that's pretty good. It's a good start. Like that's what's supposed to be happening. Most of the money in the early days is from your. And by the way, one of these days you're gonna check it's to be under. It's gonna be under the $1,000 a month. You're gonna have lost a little bit, but that's part of it. But over time, that's just one of those little bumps. Over time, it's going to start to be the exponential growth.
Yeah, it's true. It seems in the beginning like just such slow movement, and the real magic happens with that compounding. And then as that money that you earn starts to grow money, etc. Okay, so let's see. If someone is listening and feels overwhelmed and doesn't know where to begin, well, you've already told us that. You've already told us start investing and live within your means, right? Invest early, but if it's not early, then just do it now, right? What are the other strategies that they can do if they feel like they're behind or they need to do more?
I mean, I always say start with learning. Like take the class, listen to this. If my words are reaching your ears, you're already doing something right. You're listening to a great, personal finance podcast. I always say no one will ever care about your money like you do. And so you need to learn about the basics, read a couple personal finance books, watch some YouTube videos, listen to some podcasts. I think that takes away the fear and kind of gives you a path. And, there's always the option of talking to a professional when you want to have your work checked or want to have a specific situation, whatever it is. But I'd say it starts with education. Take Linda's class, get some of the classic books. And then I just say get started, because I think that when people feel that there's this concept in physics of static friction, where if you have like a block on a table and you start pushing on it, and like let's say it's kind of a heavy block, it's going to initially feel very, very hard to push. But then once it starts moving, it feels easier to push. And so it's actually, and that's true. It's like not only feels harder to push, it is harder to push. But once that static friction is broken, and now it's like a moving friction, it's actually easier to push. And I think a lot of people have, what's it called? We are afraid of it, like anxiety or something like that.
Okay, I just keep thinking about Jenga right now. And I think that
With
it
the
applies
block.
with what you're talking about, but you're talking about the block, like you're tapping it and you're like, you're tapping it. And then finally it gets that it loosens
But
up
once
and
it's loose, then it just flies out. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that people are dealing with that static friction of finance sometimes. And they say, I don't know how to get started, so I'm not going to do anything. And with investing, which is what I like talking about the most, I'm like, just go invest $50 and be a horrible investor. Just buy something, do anything with it. And I think, because that means like you have to open an account, you have to learn how to figure out how to transfer money, and you have to click the buy button, and you have to do something. Then you're like, okay, that actually wasn't so bad. And then maybe the next $50, maybe I'll do a little bit better. And when you just take away, you acknowledge the static friction of the situation and take away the being perfect aspect. Say, I'm not going to try to be perfect. One of my favorite sayings is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just go for good, or just go for medium, whatever. Just go for bad. Just get started, get that friction going. And between a little bit of learning and getting that static friction out of the way and taking off the pressure of doing it perfectly, I think then the wheels are in motion. And 3 months later, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, now I'm gonna optimize my expense ratios and get you're gonna be doing it all right, and that'll be great. But don't worry about that yet. Just do something.
Yeah. Okay, so my investing class right now is only available to workplaces through being hired by corporate. So I don't have one that's offered to the public right now. So please tell us about Personal Finance Club and what you offer there. Maybe by the time this is out, I'll have changed that. But please tell us about Personal Finance Club.
Or edit this out and buy Linda's new one. I'm just kidding. I mean, 99% of what we do is just create free content. We create Instagram posts, YouTube videos, podcasts, so I'm not really trying to do a sales pitch here. And so, you can follow Personal Finance Club on YouTube. You can listen to the podcast. You can follow us on Instagram or TikTok or wherever your social media is. And we just do little daily bites of, personal finance tips. If you want to kind of go through something a little bit more structured, you can go to personalfinanceclub.com and click the Start Here button. And then it's 10 free videos that are all about 5 minutes each that kind of walk through the basics of getting started investing, like what buttons to click on the scary websites. And then if you want the more complex, complete thing, there's a $99 course, which kind of pays for the other 99% of our content, which has like all the comprehensive videos when you get lifetime access. And so, no sales pitch. Like I said, I retired at 36. I do this because I love it. We sell something just to be able to, cover our expenses, but it's I think people like it. If you Google our reviews, they're very, very good.
All right, great. So tell us who needs to find Personal Finance Club and who needs to find Nectarine.
Oh man, I love giving plugs for myself. So I'd say Personal Finance Club, our focus is really on the investing portion. So I think if you're someone who is scared about investing, doesn't know how to get started, doesn't really understand an ETF versus a mutual fund versus an index fund, which stocks should you buy, IRA versus 401k, that's what Personal Finance Club is all about. And I was doing that for 6 years, teaching this stuff. And because it's not that hard, you can do it yourself. But the question I would get over and over and over is, how do I find a good financial advisor? Because these investors say, okay, I'm doing it, I'm getting it, but now I want someone to check my work, or I have an inheritance, or I want to retire. I want to see if I'm able to. And I really want to talk to a pro about that. And I would launch into this big, spiel about, I'm like, oh, financial advisors, it's kind of a tough business because most of them actually sell products and earn a commission. And that's not a really great way to make money, because you don't really want to hire those people, because then their only advice is going to be buy my products. And then there's another big set of advisors who they want you to transfer all your assets to them. They charge a % of assets under management, which is much better. But then sometimes there's very high minimums, or there's also some weird incentives. And so I would give this pitch and say, hey, you should really find someone who charges a flat fee, either by the hour or by the project. And when I'd give that pitch, their eyes would light up. They're like, oh yeah, I know. I've always had this kind of gross feeling about financial advisors, but I didn't ever really pin it to the business model. How do I find a flat fee financial advisor? And my answer would be, I have no idea. They're really hard to find. It's a very fractured market. There really should be a site out there that's a marketplace of flat fee financial advisors with reviews and all their specific areas of expertise. And I said that so many times, it's okay, we should just build it. And so we did. And that's what Nectarine is. It's at hellonectarine.com. And Linda's available on Nectarine. So if you go to hellonectarine.com, and you can just go scroll down to see Linda's beautiful face smiling at you, and you can book her for an hour or for a plan or for an ongoing relationship. And the price is listed right there, and the reviews are listed right there. And I think in terms of who should go to Nectarine, my answer is, not everyone needs to get a financial advisor as a first step always. I actually do say start with education, but I think it really comes down to a business decision. So, an hour with a financial advisor might be a couple hundred or a few $100. If your net worth is $500, you probably should be spending $300 on a financial advisor. You should be, renting a book from the library and living below your means and saving and trying to get a better job. If you are getting a $300,000 inheritance and you're going to be owing some tax on that, and you are considering moving and might want to do a 529 for your kids, okay, now maybe $3,000 for a full financial plan would be well worth it, because that you're just saving you a couple moves here and there will be a good return on the investment. So it kind of just comes down to what's the nature and complexity of your question, what's the size of the problem at hand, and when it gets to a dollar amount where it makes it worth it to bring in a professional, I think hiring a flat fee professional makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Jeremy. I love it when people plug me on the show too.
That's what we're here for.
Much appreciated.
That's the Linda show.
All right. So personalfinanceclub.com and hellonectarine.com, right?
That's exactly right.
Great. Anything else that you think the listeners should know about contacting you or connecting with you?
I mean, that's how you find me. Follow me on Instagram. And, what I always like to end with is it's really just about the 2 rules. Number 1 is live below your means. Number 2 is invest early and often. Everything else is kind of fine tuning stuff, but that's the big stuff that's going to make the difference in your life.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeremy. I think what I really hope listeners take away from today is that financial freedom isn't a perfect finish line. It's not reserved just for wealthy people or perfect investors. It's really about creating flexibility and breathing room and options that fit your life. And sometimes the biggest shift isn't about changing your entire financial situation overnight, but believing that you're not as stuck as you thought you were. Thanks so much for being here, Jeremy.
Love it. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks so much for listening to Real Money, Real Life. Want to see what's blocking you from financial confidence or discover your money personality? Head to the resources page at lindagriz.com for our free quizzes. That's LINDAGRIZ.com/resources. If you're loving what you're learning, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more people find these conversations. This show is hosted and produced by Linda Grizely Ventures, LLC. Linda Grizely, that's me, is an investment advisor representative of Nectarine, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Linda Grizely Ventures, LLC is separate and unaffiliated with Nectarine. The views expressed on this show are those of the individuals expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the views of Linda Grizely, Linda Grizely Ventures, LLC, or Nectarine. Guests on the podcast may express opinions or discuss financial strategies that are their own and should not be considered recommendations or personalized financial advice. This podcast is provided for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any securities or other products. Listeners should consult their own financial, legal, or tax professionals regarding their specific situation. Please visit hellonectarine.com and lindagriz.com for all relevant disclosures.